that Kenny Baker R2D2?
Yeah. So let's discuss film in England.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm ready.
How did you come to the subject matter? What was it that attracted you?
I think it was a kind of quite a long story of, I guess in like 1998 or something, I'd been reading Verhoeven on Verhoeven, the Faber book, and it said it detailed how when he did his national service, he'd filmed lots of troop movements and like beach landings and stuff, and that had helped him shoot all that big action sequences. Had helped him think about how he was going to do like Soldier of Orange and Starship Troopers and stuff. And I was like very envious, and I was thinking, well, how, I can shoot people in rooms, but how can I get to shoot soldiers and big canvas stuff? So I ended up thinking, I'll talk to the Sealed Knot, who are like a battle reenactment society in the UK who do Civil War stuff. So I talked to them, and I started shooting a documentary about what they do, and I did a recruitment video on this massive battle scene thing, and but while I was kind of trying to use them, they kind of started indoctrinating me with information about the Civil War, which I didn't really know much about, and my kind of interest for it started from there. And I started reading up on it, and it's just fascinating, that whole period. So that was the start of it.
And how are you dealing with kind of the historicism of it, the historical quality? Was it something you just kind of threw out at a certain point, or is it something you were holding strong to the entire time?
I think the trick of it is that you want it to be right, but you don't want to put too much information in that you would come unstuck if you came up against a bunch of scholars. I had a fear of being ripped asunder at loads of Q&As by people who'd been studying the period their whole life, and you can't fight that because you just can never know as much as them, But and Amy Jump, who wrote it, felt exactly the same way, and she was like, we know we've done the research, but it's combing it out of the script so that you don't feel that you can't be pinned down to too much specifically. So it's pretty good, and it's pretty accurate. And we had a review in a historical magazine where they analysed it, and it seemed to, we didn't drop too many terrible clangers in it, but it's quite terrifying, all that, because you want it to be right as possible, but then there's things you just don't know. I mean, one of the things we found which was really interesting was that there wasn't that much detail about what people wore. It just wasn't. If you were just a man on the street, no one really bothered to write it down or draw it. So there was there's paintings of battles and stuff, and then rich people would have their paintings, portraits done, but beyond that there wasn't much detail.
Well, that brings up the class component of the film. Like, how did you deal with the costumes and like this quality that there's a different class dynamic in all of these characters?
Well, I think it's that when we were doing the costumes, or when Emma Fry did the costumes, not the same Emma Fry from Kill List, a separate one, different woman. She kind of looked at it in the way that you look at when you dress. When you do set design for things at a period, it's like if you do a house that's set in a flat that's set in the 1970s, you don't fill it full of stuff that was made just in the 70s. It goes back in time, back to Victorian times or older. So stuff is mixed and matched. So when you've got those costumes in Field some of them are contemporary, but some of the clothing is very old, and or the design of it wouldn't have changed in hundreds of years. So that was part of it. And then she also looked at the difference between European fashion and English fashion, because some of the characters had been in Europe and come back. There's lots of complicated backstory stuff that we'd written in but wasn't in the film. So say someone like the character that Peter Ferdinando plays is someone who's fought in the wars in Europe and then come back to England for the Civil War, and the same with the Cutler character as well. Yeah, his clothing is kind of more European than it is English.
Huh. Did you do any research similarly into kind of magic? Because it's like at that same period was being developed, like Magic with a K, which I looked into watching this for the first time since like discovering Current 93.
Right.
But there's like some interesting quotes that I got, for instance, that magic is theoretically possible to cause in any object, any change which the object is capable by nature. So
Right.
like you have the drugs, but you also have like alchemy and things like that all mixing in this film.
Yeah. I mean, some of it's a bit like Kill List in that respect, that some of it is researched and some of it, oh, hello, thank you.
Thank you.
Some of it's made up.
Okay.
So you have that mixture of fiction based on fact kind of thing. So it's kind of, you have things like the scrying mirror they're all real things. I mean, the whole idea of like a crystal ball is pretty much, as far as I understand it, is any surface that's shiny that you can look into and mesmerise yourself. Then you can see the future in. So the scrying mirror is just a disc. You do the same thing. You could do it in a shiny bit of metal or whatever. But the things like the runes that he throws up are things that have been made up for the story. So which are kind of beyond understanding. So.
Oh, interesting. You mentioned the ambition of the battle sequences, but it's at once it seems like your most ambitious film, but also it's a very contained film, almost stage-like because you have 4 characters. How did you balance those two qualities?
I mean, it's kind of another pragmatic film like Down Terrace, where it's built out of. It started with us wanting to make a film, and we had a little bit of money left over from Sightseers that we'd earned, and we had that as the nut of the budget, which was, I don't know, about 40 grand or something, and we were just going to make any movie that, you know, once you got 40 grand, that dictates very much what you can do. So we'd started from that position, but then Film 4 came in and we had a little bit more money, but it wasn't. But we're already down that process of going, well, what's it going to be, you know? So Amy, we were going to shoot it in the woods, and Ames was saying, well, we've done the woods quite a lot, you know, it's all over Kill List and it's all over Sightseers, and we're trying to find new way, you know, try not to repeat ourselves too much. So she came up with this idea of doing it in a field, and just saying, well, look, it's like a blank canvas, and it's a control. It's a bit like, you know, you get with these movies like, you know, Rope or like Lifeboat or something, where it's just like it's a totally. He set out a parameter to start with, and then he works within it, and I think that was really interesting. And also, I think we've been watching Dogville as well, so there was a bit of that in it too.
It seemed also in production that the most striking image was the amount of lenses you had. Like, how did you devise the look of the film?
Well, Laurie and I had been doing a lot of testing. I've been on the internet, and I was looking for lenses for my stills camera, and whenever you search in Amazon, they always come up with these lenses which are like 20 quid or 10 quid or 5 quid, and I always wondered what they were, so I just bought a load of them to see what they were. And they're kind of like plastic. They're really weird. It's like you get one which has got an EOS mount on, and you clack it onto your camera, and then all the other lenses just are like on sleeves that fit on top. And so it makes all this crazy refraction all through the plastic, and they're really terrible lenses, you know. But when you look at them, they kind of feel really old, and Laurie was saying it's all the things they've been trying to get rid of in optics over the last 100 years. These are all the errors that these things have. So anyway, I bought those, and we played around with those for a bit, and we really liked them. And I was also thinking down the line of like pinhole cameras, and like with a which is basically, you know, just a port cap for the camera with just a hole in it, and if you get the hole the right size, then you can take a photograph with it, and it's like what original, you know, old cameras used to be. But you need a lot of light to make those work. So you could take a digital still with them, but you couldn't shoot video up until recently. But the cameras are now the ISO so high on them, I figured, maybe we can make our own pinhole movie lens and start. So we did some tests, and they didn't really work, but it got us thinking about, well, let's make the hole a bit bigger and just make some lenses. So we bought some telescopes and stuff from toy shops and smashed them up and looked at the optics in those, and some of the lenses in the film are from that.
It's interesting that you have this elaborate website with all of this production material on it, and one of the things is that you're discussing the influences on the film, and especially visually, and Oni Baba comes up too. I mean, how do you grapple with a film that seems very singular, but like, you know, acknowledging so forthright all of these influences and people's interest in wanting to kind of place it in this lineage of films? Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I'm trying to work out what I think about a critical approach, full stop, you know, because I think that, the way that people approach movies
when you're interviewed, it tends to be like people just go on a list of other films that it might be like, and then you kind of go, well, it's a bit like this and it's a bit like that. But I don't think we ever think like that when we make the films. I think Onibaba had come up because we'd shown Andy Stark, the producer, the script, and he goes, well, what about Onibaba? That's set in the reed bed and you want to set it in the thing, so you should have a look at that. So we looked at it and we were like, yeah, I'd never seen it before, and I thought, this is a brilliant film. So Laurie and I watched that. But beyond that, it was kind of, Culloden had always been something that I'd been a big fan of. Apparently I'm pronouncing it wrong as well. I noticed in the press the other day.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce it. Anyway, sorry Scotland. But that movie I'd seen when I was a kid and just thought was phenomenal, you know. And it's like basically, you know, it's the beginning of found footage, isn't it? Culloden or mock doc. So that, but I think Culloden is a kind of an influence on all the films I've done, more than just this film. But he's a film that they wear costumes in, so there's another coincidence that's similar.
But the visuals are so different. Like that's a perfect point. Like Culloden's is influence, but it's not really placing this in much of a heritage.
No, it doesn't give you much of a chance, does it? If you say that's it, or even if you say Witchfinder General, but it's just in the same period. It's not. There's the only thing that it kind of shares is that there's a kind of the Witchfinder is a little bit like a cowboy film. It's like a rural English cowboy film, and Field becomes cowboyish towards the end. But yeah, I would say it was a much harder film to classify than the.
So maybe we could talk about some of the distinctive visual set pieces that occur and what your kind of motivation was for those, apart from influences. Like we can throw those out.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
So you have these tableaus that are extremely striking. Those recur throughout. What was kind of the motivation behind that approach?
Well, we thought that there was a couple of things in that. One of them was that they'd been written originally early on in the development of the thing as kind of woodcuts. So they would go to a still, an illustration, and kind of played with that for a bit, and then the names came up with this idea of doing them as living paintings. And I just thought that was great. And everyone, when we read the script, and I mean, we did the read-throughs, and the actors were all a bit, oh, that sounds, I don't know about how that, you know, actors can be a bit wary of the old, the tableau vivant, because they have to do it on stage, and no one likes doing it, apparently, you know. They always feel a bit awkward doing them. But when we shot it on the day, it felt so right, you know, they were all getting in, doing this with their hands to get the hands right, and it, you know. The other thing we were thinking about was that that the film exists before cinema, and that it's got these traits in it and tropes that are before cinema. So that it's kind of half theatre, but it's half painting. And also the way that the editing is so fragmented and fractured is kind of it's like it's before editing has been invented and sorted out.
And there's also a quality of like what gets, as you said earlier, what gets depicted in painting. Like it would typically be a rich person's commission, whereas this is kind of off the beaten path. It's kind of got an unsavory quality. There's like the freakout moments as well. So when you're trying to articulate the drugs, that seems like it's a difficult thing to approach with cinematic language.
Well, it's been done a lot, and it's a really tricky one. You're right. I mean, I think you can end up with quite bad kind of surrealist images which don't translate brilliantly to cinema. And I don't quite know why that doesn't work, but it doesn't. Maybe it's something to do with you seeing surrealist images moving. They're not as arresting as when they're still, maybe. But or you've got the other end. The other end of it for me is something like Enter the Void, which is a pretty realistic, in some respects of it, kind of what imagining of what being on drugs might be like, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think what I was thinking though was more, it's less like showing what you might remember from a trip, but more making you feel like your brain might be being affected.
I see.
So that's where with say something like the fast cut stuff, I was looking at persistence of vision. So, you know, with persistence of vision, which is the main trick that cinema is based on, of like showing 24 still images which have the illusion of movement. But then if you get two streams of images and show them at the same time, because original cinema or early doors cinema was, you know, it was 12 frames per second. And what if you saw those two streams at once? Then you would perceive both images but simultaneously, and what would that do to your brain, as you try to unpack it? And it's a different thing from cutting very quickly lots of different images where you just have to process them really fast. This actually makes you think in a different way to have to think about two things at the same time. So I think that was how we kind of approached the drug stuff.
How about the editing overall, like the general structure of the film? Your films always have a very structured, interesting editing process as well.
Well, it wasn't, after coming off Sightseers, which was something that was carved out of the rushes, this thing, there wasn't any fat on it. There was no improvisation, and I think we dropped one line in the whole film. So it was what it was. We kind of, I was cutting it every night in the hotel room, and yeah, that was fine. I roughly put it together just to make sure we had the scenes, but it changed a little bit in the editing when Amy and I got it home, but it wasn't like the radical kind of restructuring that happened to Sightseers or even Kill List, really.
And you mentioned that there's no improvisation. Is that because like the script is like it's hard, it's a beast. It's like it's a language that is difficult to access? I mean, how was it dealing with that in the shoot?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't improvise it, because the only way you could improvise it is if they'd workshopped it in the language with a scholar there checking that what the words that they were making up were actually historically right. So, and that's like too much like hard work. We did a couple of sessions where they improvised and it was terrible. I mean, the actors were great as usual, but the dialogue became modern and straight away. So there was no, you can hardly say 10 words before you say something that's a modern word. So they and they were happy not to do it, to be honest. They were all like, well, no, the script's great, we don't want to, this is the best way you could ever say it. So yeah, that kind of took away one of my, the things I have in my back pocket for getting out of difficult scenes that don't work necessarily. But it was all good, really, so it wasn't a problem. But it's where we've come to over the last few years, so I think it's the first fully realised, completed script that we've done. It wasn't that didn't have to rely on being fixed in the shoot.
It's an interesting script. I mean, there's some thematic links with your other work, especially the concept of working for some higher power that you don't quite understand. I mean, were you conscious of this in the when you were mounting it, like that there were these thematic links, or is it something that you noticed kind of after the fact?
I think that the thing, we did notice that stuff, and we thought about it in terms of, we didn't want to be too heavy-handed about it, but in terms of it being a prequel to the other movies, like it sets up the trouble that they have to deal with later on.
Oh wow!
But things that got into it that we kind of noticed afterwards to a degree were things like that it's yet another script that is the transformative hero, and we're like, that's really similar to all four of the films we've made. And hopefully that won't happen. We're ironing that out of the next couple of scripts. But yeah, it's we really try to make them different each time, but inevitably bits of it are the same.
And you've talked about looking to make a midnight movie. Do you feel that you've succeeded in that, now that it's played a bit?
Yeah, I think it's got that quality that it's kind of uncompromising and unique to itself, and it shows you things you've not seen in other films, and that's about it, because you can't really define a midnight movie much more than that, otherwise it becomes just a cliche of one. So that and we made a film that we had complete creative control over as well, which is usually the sign of something like that, in terms of the if you look at the king of midnight movies, which is Eraserhead, it's kind of it has ticks some of those boxes that film has.
Even something like El Topo, I mean, like, I feel like maybe you have to have a certain degree of open-endedness where people are trying to figure out what's happening. I mean, was it ever a struggle to not be too didactic, not to explain too much? There's never a risk that we'd ever explain too much in a film, so there was never any pressure to. But I always think the films are pretty straightforward. I never think, oh, that's complicated. In the history of cinema, they're not complicated films, but I know that there's a portion of the audience which expect things to be
extremely explained. But I think there's a knee-jerk reaction to stuff that isn't completely wrapped up and tied up with a bow sometimes. But then I don't know. But you can also, I always find that when I watch stuff, I can like it and not like it at the same time. But it's only down to the kind of difficult modern world of Twitter that you could immediately be tied to a decision that you make when you watch a movie. If you're foolish enough to tweet about it as soon as you've watched it, go, I didn't like it. But yeah, I don't know. But yeah, well, often I watch things and I'll like it and then I'll dislike it and then like it later on over a period of days or months. And that's my massive excuse for people who don't like my film, that I hope at some point in months' time they will.
Have you noticed a different reaction to a domestic audience versus those that may not have the same relationship with the history?
I don't know, because I think it's an assumption outside of Britain that the British audience will know, what that stuff is, but I didn't know it. I didn't, as someone who was interested in it, I didn't know anything about it, and I think there's stuff there's stuff that's researched into that movie that it requires quite a deep knowledge of history to understand, but isn't important. It's like the whole thing about the King's Evil, which is the disc that he had. Oh, I shouldn't have grabbed the mic. The disc that's round his neck, and he goes, you have the, it's the scene where he's talking to, when Whitehead's talking to Cutler, and they talk about the king. But the history behind that is that if you've got a certain disease called scrofula, you go and see the king, and he would touch you and give you this medallion, which you'd then be supposedly cured of the disease. He could cure you with his hand. Who knows that? But it's not important, because it's part of this idea that we like the idea that you were like dropped in time and you didn't. No one, if someone dropped in from the future now here, we wouldn't give them wouldn't explain anything, would you? They'd be looking at this and going, what the fuck is that? Why is this here? But you wouldn't explain unless they asked.
And it does kind of create that open-ended quality that Kill List especially had, where you don't really know what's on the other side of the ending, like where things have necessarily gone fully. Like you don't have a full understanding of that.
Yeah, but you know in the moment what's going on, and I think that's all you ever know. In life, you don't know what's going to happen in a minute, do we?
How have you found the kind of unique distribution model you've had with the full day and date release in the UK, the elaborate kind of almost special feature website-driven website? Have people responded well to that? Yeah,
I think that there was something amazing about it being seen by so many people so quick, and it felt like a tiny cultural moment. Whereas if it had just gone into the cinema, it would just snuck out, and hardly anyone would have seen it. It's very, it would have been very bespoke and tiny. So that's all really good, and that. As someone who's wanted to make films for years and found it, and kind of religiously bought how-to books and always I'm only interested in extras on DVDs if they're about the nuts and bolts of filmmaking. I don't care about the people talking about characters and how they got all put together in the story, because I've just watched that. I want to know how people make stuff. So we wanted to do a making of that kind of broke it down as much as we could and say, well, this is. Hopefully you can read between the lines and get some insight into how we made the thing, because it's the things that no one will ever tell you. But it also feels really bad to do it, because you don't really want to tell everyone what your process is, because it kind of ruins the film. But I think we struck a balance on that.
You said that you were concerned early on that someone leaked or offhandedly mentioned how quick the shoot was. Is that like a similar thing that you're concerned about, that it changes the perception of the film to know too much?
It's not so much that, it's what happens with reviews is that whatever information you put out, a lot of times reviews will just be structured around those three things. So they'll go, I didn't like this film because it was shot quick, therefore it looks cheap. If they didn't know that, they would never know, because they just don't know, So that kind of thing just gives ammunition to that kind of criticism. But and it shouldn't really be the story of what that shouldn't. In the way that the whole how the film release story is really drives me mad having to talk about it, because it's just like that. Sometimes that's the lead thing in an interview, going, "Oh, talk about the release of the film." It's like, what? You know, it's like talking about the colour of the seats in the cinema or something. You know.
So it seems like it's a smaller budget, more intimate film. Is that giving way to like a one-on, one-off for like a bigger budget following film? I know you've mentioned Freakshift as a...
Yeah, we're doing High-Rise, J.G. Ballard's High-Rise is next.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, of course, High-Rise,
You know, I mean, it's more that if you want to make a film, then if you want to just go and make something, then it's going to be low budget because of the complication of financing. So to get, at the moment for us, to get together £300,000, you can go to one person and that's about the outer limit to what one person can write a cheque for in one of the for one of the funding bodies in the UK. So that's just the way it is. And if you want $1 million, you're going to have to start gluing together lots of bits of money. And if you want 10 million, then then it's a full-time job getting that money. And that's why our bigger budget stuff has taken a bit more time. It's taken more time to come together. So, yeah. But yeah, I like working. I've always liked working at low budget. So I'm happy to do, as long as the film's designed right. It doesn't matter. The budget's not really an issue.
Are you excited about the prospect of adapting an author like Ballard?
Yeah, well, it's done. I mean, Ames has done it. She's written it, and it's really brilliant. You know, I read the current final version this morning, and yeah, it's phenomenal. We've already storyboarded it, and kind of we're looking at the art design stuff of it. So it's quite a big thing to get your teeth into. It's complicated. There's a lot of characters, and and aesthetically it'll be very different from the other films as well. So that's all being designed and kind of thought about and processed at the moment.
Is that because of the adaptation, where you feel more compelled to create an aesthetic that speaks to someone's book? No, it's more that my films have all been kind of handheld because of the budget. It's not to do with, I mean, it is a choice, but it's not. And my TV work is much more fluid, you know, and so I'm trying to. You know, it's the first time that there'll be a chance to use this kind of, to tell a story in a different way. So that's where it comes from. I think also that there's the Ballard book set in 75, and we're shooting it in 75, so it's a period thing. So there's a lot of kind of period aesthetic that we want to bring to it as well. The look of it is going to be very 70s. Did you storyboard A Field in England?
No. I think I drew a couple of images for it, but it's one of those things you can't really, because you're moving so fluidly and fast, you can't really be tied down to boards. But I might have. I mean, what I'm tending to do now is draw out the whole film and watch it in my head, rather than as a storyboard for people to look at, and you don't stick them up on the wall and go, "We're doing these shots today." But it helps for me for the visualising of stuff. So I've done that, you know, quite a few times now for Freakshift and for High-Rise.
And does that leave them open to improvisation or less? Are you moving more away from that?
I think the script on High-Rise is pretty damn good. I don't think there'll be any improv in that, but it might be maybe just to. I've been playing with this thing where you kind of shoot the script and then you don't shoot any. You play the script, the last take in as audio, and you get them to perform mute, listening to what they would be thinking and saying, and so that's kind of interesting, and that gets you. There's some really odd expressions you get that you wouldn't get normally if they were trying to pretend to be thinking about things. So that I might do that. I don't know. See how I feel.
Maybe we could talk about Freakshift a bit more. And we talked about.
Okay. Cool.
I mean, it sounds like a project that is really exciting. But does that mean that it's been kind of put on the back burner?
No, it's been moved because it's a very particular thing because it's shot at night.
Okay.
So if you miss the window for it, you have to shift it a year. So we've missed the window, so we've shifted it a year. So yeah. So and then that makes a big gap where I made a film this year, which is like the first year in 4 years I've not made it. 2013 is a filmless year, which is a bit of a shame, and I didn't want to have no film next year either, so that's where High-Rise has come in. So, but we'd been prepping, you know, we've been getting it ready and just seeing if we could do both at the same time. So hopefully it'll, one or the other will happen for definite, hopefully.
Does that allow for a more ambitious production to have that time available to it?
Not really. I mean, films come together pretty quick, unless you're developing like, I don't know, like you've got a lot of very complicated props, or you've got like a digital process that has to be written from scratch, like Jurassic Park, when there was no infrastructure for that, so they have to start years before to get it to make sense. But for a normal movie, you can go from a standing start in a couple of months. I mean, and sets go up really quick. It's not that side of it is all quite straightforward. It's more about when the actors are available is the thing that pushes a movie up and down up a schedule. So, but from my point of view, the more I can think about every aspect of it, it's from designing the shots down to what's on the paintings on the walls, what is the packaging of the stuff in the kitchens, and what colour are their shoes and all this. I want to have complete control over every aspect of that. It's not like a thing of going to all the departments, what do you think? Come up with some stuff. It's like you've got to brief them absolutely meticulously, and then they can work within those parameters. But if you don't do that, then you've got a lot of erroneous thought coming into it that then you have to then comb back out again, and that becomes like more work than just doing the homework in the first place.
Was a film in England a film where you were waiting particularly for like Rhys or any other actor, or was the time between finalizing everything and starting production pretty quick?
No, it was really swift. Yeah. I mean, I think that the whole thing was, a matter of 3 months or something like that. But Amy writes really fast as well, so I think so that side of it is good. So she can write the script, then rewrite the script and rewrite it again, like within like a month and a bit. So it's but I think you have to be flexible with these things for the low budget, because it's got to fit within a very small period. I can't remember what we were doing actually, I was coming off something else and then going on to something else. So
Did you have to rehearse that one a bit more than usual because of the script, or?
No, we didn't. We did one day, I think, where we did a couple of read-throughs, which were always appalling. They're just awful. I don't think I've ever been to a good read-through for anything, and then not just my own work, then we did a bit of rehearsal, but I don't know. Unless you're there in the moment, it's quite hard. Those things you kind of get a sense of what it might be like, but you don't necessarily. You need that pressure of it happening, and in the costumes, and a lot of it's to do with the atmosphere of the shoot as well, like because we shot in chronological order, so by the end of it, that stuff when he comes out of the hedge, we didn't shoot that at the same time as we shot him going into the hedge at the beginning. It's totally different days, and he looks completely different, I think. I mean, physically, he looks like he's aged about 6 months.
It's a film, following each of your films as they've come out, the reception seems heavily on the actors in this one. I mean, what is your perception on why that may be? Were you recognizing these great performances as how great the reviews have?
Yeah, I mean, they're good actors.
Yeah.
It's all in the casting. That's the first decision. You make that wrong, and then it doesn't matter what you do for the rest of the process. So, yeah, I knew they were great. I mean, I've worked with most of them before, so there wasn't really an issue. And I know I hadn't worked with Rhys before, but I'd seen all his TV work, which is fantastic. So, yeah, I mean, it's. But also, I think it's that they get those good reactions critically, because I think we give them the space to. This is how I claw back the. From the actors being praised, I claw some of that back. But because there's space for them to perform, and there's some quite long takes in the film, and I like to see a bit of acting and see it. You want to see their face. You don't want to mediate them too much with editing.
Yeah, there are a lot of long takes, and even slow-mo, I think, incorporated in this one. Is that because you're reacting in the moment to what you're seeing from the actors, or?
I think that I think basically an ideal performance, an ideal take, you can take in one shot.
Okay.
That's what you want from your rushes. You want to look at it and go, let's have it all. I don't need to cut this because every beat and every moment of it is exactly what I wanted. And so you use it. Like, so there's coverage on all those scenes. There's all close-ups and stuff, but then we just go with the one, we just go, like the one when they're in the grass and they're talking, it's just, we looked at it and went, I used to love it. I loved watching them, I loved the pauses and the whole thing. So that just went in one shot. And so stuff that's more cutty, sometimes it is, you know, you take it right up until the moment that shot can't go on anymore, you know, and then, I mean, you know, obviously it's different when it's flip-flop kind of two people talking thing, but generally that's what, you know, you look at classic Hollywood is like that a lot, you know, it's kind of a master that goes through, and they go from like, you know, head to toe mostly, and then the close-ups on American, isn't it, which is from the tops of the thighs to here, and then like you get one shot in a John Ford film that's like that, like one maybe one close-up in the whole movie, or a handful, you know. So I think that's you know, that's that kind of muscular, ballsy filmmaking where you believe in your shots and your performers and you let them hang there doing their thing, you know.
Were you thinking that you were making a Western while you were engaging in this?
Yeah, I mean, those guys are cowboys, you know, they go out and they, you know, around that period, then they will go off to America and set America up. And those hats are, you know, it's not a coincidence they've got those hats on because they are their original cowboys, you know. So it's, it kind of it was something that occurred, obviously it was in the script, the shootout's all in there, but it occurred to us more once we saw the costumes and saw them marauding around on the prairie and going, oh right, this is, and then down to when I was directing it, like, you know, just him turning the bench over is a very Western thing to do. You know, you put the stuff on the table and turn it over, and but then obviously it's El Topo as well, you know, so he's got a very Jodorowsky hat through a lot of it, but and when he stalks off at the end with that big rifle, it's something straight out of that or Mobius, I think, you know.
Thanks, Ben.
Cheers, man.